Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. His ship came down in pieces, trailing silent fire across a moon that hadn't seen life in decades. No distress beacon, no telemetry. Just a cockpit filled with dying lights and the sharp scent of scorched composite. He slammed into the ground harder than training ever accounted for, harness biting into his ribs as metal screamed beneath him. Dust filled the fractured window, thick enough to choke. He kicked the hatch open with one boot. It fell flat against powdered soil that shimmered faintly under an indifferent sky. No atmosphere sensors responded. The suit hissed when sealed, but the readouts blinked erratically, refusing to tell him what was safe, what wasn't, or what still waited just beyond visual range. A ridge of collapsed domes loomed ahead, their glass ribs torn open like carcasses left too long in heat. Curved structures half swallowed by sand stretched toward the horizon in silence. No movement, no wind. Just wreckage buried beneath years of disinterest. He moved carefully. Each step sent whispers up through the dust, fine particles dancing around his ankles. The salvage scanner refused to lock. Something about the radiation signature twisted its calibration. He crouched by a skeletal comms relay, pried a panel loose, found nothing but brittle wiring and rust. Heat pressed against his back. Not sun. No star in sight. Something internal failing in his suit, or memory trickling out of order. Sweat rolled beneath the collar. He didn't wipe it. Hands stayed busy. Eyes stayed on shadows. Past the ridge, a corridor between crumbling biodomes narrowed into a gulch. Walls of curved alloy leaned inward, casting long stripes across the floor. In one of those bands stood a figure. Small. Motionless. Feet bare, toes curled into dust like it belonged here. It didn't move. It waited. He didn't speak. Neither did it. When the voice came, it didn't match the lips. Calm. Too calm. A practiced cadence that belonged somewhere far from this ruin. Will you marry my mom? No stutter. No inflection. No visible breath. The air turned thick inside the helmet. Not from atmosphere. From something else. A question that didn't belong in a place like this. Not phrased like that. Not from a child who hadn't blinked since he stopped walking. The boy stepped forward. Slender limbs. Gray skin that caught light oddly, like mist seen through fogged glass. Eyes too dark. Mouth too soft. His tone didn't change. She's sweet. Another step. Please. He tried to respond. Nothing came. The ground felt wrong beneath his boot. Not soft. Not hard. Like something waiting for permission. She's all I have. No urgency in the child's tone. Just a wait, measured and final. As if this wasn't a question. As if it had been answered before. Many times. By others who stood in this same corridor. Others who didn't speak again. Boots pressed into soil that no longer crumbled. The dust clung instead, forming a thin film across his legs like memory refusing to let go. Ahead, the child watched. No breath, no tremor. Only eyes, round, black, reflecting nothing but distance. I'm Kez, the voice said. Not shy. Not cheerful. Not mechanical either. Something else. Each syllable landed with quiet precision, as if rehearsed long before lips ever shaped them. You look kind, the child added, chin lifting slightly. Kind enough. Nothing responded in his chest. No instinct, no laugh. The words were placed too carefully to relax around. Kind enough for what? For whom? She's nearby, the child continued. She's really nice. The sentence came dressed in ordinary language. But the air around it bent, as if niceness required explanation in this place. As if kindness was currency measured in survival. He didn't speak. Not yet. Curiosity hadn't earned that right. The child turned. What? No glance to confirm he followed. No hesitation in the pace. Just motion. Just assumption. As if companionship had already been accepted. As if refusal was no longer on the table. Metal frames curved upward in twisted shapes overhead, structures that once fed life into air, now strangled in silence. Something above creaked, not loud, not wind-driven. A sound that didn't repeat. No birds, no insects, just breath inside the helmet and footsteps disappearing into narrow distance. He followed. Every few paces the child slowed. Not visibly, but enough that it registered, calibrated to keep proximity tight, but never too close. A practiced rhythm. Walk ahead, wait, resume. As if the path had been trodden often but never by two. Words came again, softer this time. She's lonely. She doesn't say much anymore. But she smiles. The dome ahead had collapsed inward, forming a low tunnel of cracked panels and hanging wires. Light filtered through fractures in uncertain angles. The child ducked beneath a beam without pause. She'll like you. No emotion behind the claim. Not flat, just factual. Like predicting sunrise. The adult followed without crouching, letting the helmet scrape the low steel edge, letting the sharp contact remind him of choice. He could turn back. He could push the emergency ping, wait days for silence. Instead, he stepped inside. Pipes curved along the wall like ribs. Old roots pushed through seams in the flooring, dry but pulsing slightly underfoot. No reason for that movement. No breeze. Nothing mechanical remained operational. The child's hand brushed one of them, lightly, almost a touch of affection. But when asked about it, the voice shifted. You don't need to go in there. Eyes stayed on the hallway branching left. A sealed hatch at the end, half covered in calcified residue, edges dented. The child walked faster, away from that corridor. Nothing good in there. It's empty. Another pause. This time, eyes locked directly. Not pleading. Not warning. Something in between. We stay on this path. She'll be happy if you do. The hallway narrowed again. A pool of thick shadow spilled across the floor ahead, not from absence of light but from the presence of something that drank it differently. Shapes moved within that darkness, not physical, just patterns that made the eye question itself. The child didn't slow. Small feet padded across it, leaving no mark. No splash. He hesitated just once. Only a breath. She told me someone would come. I asked if it would be someone like you. She smiled but didn't answer. A vine creaked somewhere above, snapping under its own dry weight. She said if he's kind, he'll stay. And if he's not, he'll still stay. Because it's the only way to wake her. The words arrived too late. He was already through the shadow, already watching the child turn another corner, already realizing no map had been drawn for this place. Only paths memorized by one who never left. At the next junction, the child paused again. Fingers brushed a panel embedded in the wall. Nothing lit up. No system responded. Still, the gesture was precise, like ritual. Here, the voice whispered. You'll see her soon. He wanted to ask where everyone else had gone. Why no bodies? Why this child sounded older than any comms officer he'd served with. But the questions dissolved in the air before speech formed. Not because he lacked courage. Because the place itself no longer required answers. Only arrival. Glass curved above like the ribs of something long extinct, its panels webbed with roots too pale to belong to anything grown under stars. The air here shifted different. Not in weight, but in purpose. Like it remembered how to move for someone else and resented the change. Vines crawled across the floor in patterns that looked intentional. Not planted, but placed. He followed the small figure without question, though nothing in his training spoke to chambers like this or children who led you toward them. Greenery thrived despite the collapse. Leaves the size of shields, flowers that opened without light, stems that coiled as if aware. No decay. No insects. Just silence that watched him breathe. At the center stood a pedestal wrapped in living matter, its base entwined with something like bone. Not real bone. Not artificial. A blend. On top, a capsule rested, not sealed in metal, not locked by interface. It hovered above the stone, caught in a shimmer that refused to ripple. Inside, a woman. No wires, no restraints. No glass between her and whatever kept her untouched. Eyes closed, face tilted slightly upward, lips parted as though a name had almost escaped before silence took its place. Skin unscarred. Hair suspended in gentle arcs as if underwater. Hands folded near the collarbone, not posed, not sculpted. Simply waiting. He didn't speak. Breath caught behind his teeth, unsure whether reverence or confusion should move first. "She's sleeping," the boy said. Words dropped like pebbles into too clear water. "She's been sleeping a long time." His own fingers twitched. No instinct pushed them forward. Whatever this field was, it held more than time. It held memory. It held decision. It refused interruption. "She said she'd wake up when someone worthy asks." The sentence landed too close. Not because of its meaning, but because of its certainty. He exhaled, shallow. Humor tried to rise, the kind built to mask discomfort. It failed halfway. The air refused to carry it. "You're serious?" The child nodded once. Not eager. Not hopeful. Just true. "Say it," the voice urged. "Say you'll marry her. That's how it works." The absurdity sat there between them, refusing to rot. No smile from the speaker. No wink. Just a still form suspended in that impossible field, her lips never moving, yet her presence reaching past every law he knew. He took a step closer. The shimmer deepened, not in brightness, but in sound, thin vibration at the base of the skull, like something old tuning itself to his breath. "Why me?" No answer came. "You waited here. All this time. For someone. You waited." Another breath. Another step. The woman remained still. But the shimmer began to change shape. Only slightly. Enough for the eyes to question. "What if I don't?" The child didn't answer. Shoulders rose. Not in threat. Not in sadness. Acceptance, maybe. Or practice. Another step. The shimmer thinned just above her chest. Light gathered, then dispersed. "You think she'll wake up if I ask?" No nod this time. The answer had already been spoken. The words escaped without intent. "Sure. I'll marry her." Not said with meaning. Not shaped with commitment. Just tossed, light as air, meant to deflect pressure, not absorb it. But the shimmer changed. Not a glow. Not a surge. More a tearing, thin and slow, as if whatever kept her suspended disliked laughter. Particles bent inward. Roots along the floor curled tighter. Leaves twisted on themselves without touch. The field around her stuttered. Not visually. Not loudly. In the marrow. In the space just before thought. He stepped back. The light broke. Not shattered, fractured gently like skin splitting under frost. Her lips parted farther. A breath pulled through her chest, deep and unhurried, as if time returned to her in pieces. Eyes opened. Not wide. Not alarmed. Just present. She stared through the air between them without blinking. He didn't speak. No joy. No panic. Just stillness that wasn't silence. The dome seemed to hold its own breath. Her hands remained folded. Head tilted slightly. A line traced across her brow, thin but unmissable. Her gaze met his. No confusion. Recognition. Not instant. Not curious. Certain. The kind that didn't ask who. Only how. The child didn't speak. Just watched. Mouth pressed into something like triumph or relief. Maybe neither. She moved her hand. Not much. A curl of fingers. A shift of shoulder. Her eyes stayed locked. Not studying. Not judging. Reading. "You're late." No voice. Just a movement in the air. The meaning wasn't heard. It arrived. He wanted to speak, but words no longer belonged to him. Not in here. Not to her. Her body rose from the capsule, not by effort but by invitation. Roots detached willingly. The vines at her feet unwound with reverence. She stepped onto the ground with bare soles that made no sound. The temperature dropped. Not drastically. Not dangerously. Enough to draw breath tight. Enough to make sweat retreat into skin. Enough to remind every cell that something had changed. She walked toward him. Each step measured without measuring. She stopped one breath away. Her eyes didn't waver. You made it past the corridor. No smile. No warmth. Just knowledge. A moment passed. A long one. She tilted her head. You weren't supposed to look like this. He exhaled. Shallow. The space behind his heart pulled inward. I don't know you. That's not true. Her voice hadn't moved. Her mouth hadn't moved. The air had. You were smaller. That one landed differently. You asked me a question once. And I said no. She touched her own chest. And I regretted it for a very long time. He tried to step back. His body didn't move. You didn't ask it the way you just did. She looked toward the child. The child didn't move. Her gaze returned to his face. But this time, you said it wrong enough to break it. One blink. Hers. Behind her, leaves began to wilt. Not from heat. Not from absence. From return. You shouldn't have come this far alone. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the front of his suit. You always do. The ground behind the greenhouse sloped downward, not by design, but by years of quiet collapse. Ivy stretched across broken stairways that led nowhere, roots gripped railings with the patience of something that had forgotten time ever mattered. No lights marked the descent. Just dim shapes carved from erosion and intent. Stone gave way to old alloy. Not exposed, but suggested, patches of faded insignia half buried beneath moss that didn't grow toward light. Footfalls landed without echo. Each step pressed into silence like a question. At the base of the incline, a door waited. Bent in its frame, fused on one side, sealed not by code, but by memory. His hand reached without permission. Fingers brushed the edge. The surface pulsed once beneath skin, almost warm. A noise low enough to miss followed, more sensation than sound. The door split open. No creak. No resistance. Just space yielding to presence. Inside, machines rested in slow ruin. Screens dark. Consoles draped in dust. Metal surfaces pocked with corrosion. A table with restraints built for larger limbs. Broken glass underfoot. No smell. No blood. Just the impression that whatever had happened here left without closing the door behind it. In the corner, a vault. Not a large one. No blinking interface, no artificial guardian, no weapon embedded in its wall. Just a rectangular terminal sunk into flooring no longer flat. The panel on its side blinked once. Blue. Faint. His hand hovered above it. The moment stretched, not from hesitation, but from recognition. The touch activated more than access. A voice emerged. Fragmented. Not hers. Not his. A record. Transmission log, date fractured. Language drifted between dialects before settling into something he understood without realizing how. Colony defense sequence activated at 0 hour. He listened. Experimental protocol approved without off-world sanction. He stepped back. Command override issued by research lead. Energy net deployed across all population sectors. He blinked. Resulting temporal distortion incomplete. Target zone destabilized. Rescue window missed. He turned toward the door. Didn't leave. Survivors, 2. Lead operative. 1 dependent. He stood there too long. The terminal continued. Temporal bleed observed. Subject 1 suspended in phase-locked stasis. Subject 2, development uncertain. Morphological data unstable. Cognitive markers misaligned. The air inside the chamber thinned. Not due to pressure. Something closer. Projected age, indeterminate. Estimated exposure, full duration. He stepped closer to the terminal. A line of data scrolled across the cracked screen. Subject 2, memory integrity fragmented. Behavioral profile inconsistent with baseline. He swallowed hard. Recommendation, isolate both. Contain site. Deny approach. Destroy vault upon confirmation of anomaly. A long silence. Last line blinked once, then twice. Command never executed. He looked around the room again. Noticed a second seat behind the table. Smaller. Less worn. No restraints. Just deep indentations where someone once waited without moving. He returned to the vault. Another line surfaced. Subject 2 exhibits pattern mimicry. Language assimilation complete. Emotional cues adapted. A final entry. Do not trust apparent age. He stepped away. Outside the chamber, roots rustled without wind. Light in the corridor dimmed further. Far above, glass shifted. Vines curled tighter along the walls, not with hunger, but with memory. He moved toward the exit. Each footstep now answered by something beneath. Something that had waited not for him, but for the words he would speak next. Stone tiles were uncovered one by one, not by tools but by the boy's hands, palms pressing into soil with a familiarity that spoke of repetition. Symbols emerged beneath dust, shapes too precise for coincidence, too curved for language. Some shimmered faintly before fading back into the floor, like they'd tasted presence and weren't impressed. He knelt without asking for help. His voice carried instructions with the same ease he'd used to name his mother. No tension, no hesitation, just facts wrapped in ceremony. Here, he said, pointing to a ring of flat stones that curved toward the fractured dome. You stand where the mark breathed. She stands opposite. I draw between. Words repeated like lessons. Lines carved into ground without blades. Each gesture old enough to feel borrowed from something that never died, only slept. Questions rose. None spoken. Instead, hands obeyed. Body moved. Sand brushed aside with boots no longer concerned with answers. A symbol shaped like an eye surrounded by thorns appeared beneath his left heel. He shifted, trying not to look at it again. You have to say the word before the word knows you. That was the next instruction. No translation. No elaboration. Just a statement tossed like a pebble into deep water. She arrived without sound. Barefoot. Arms loose at her sides. Gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Her presence bent the air without force. Heat left first. Then expectation. She crossed into the ring, stopped at the place already prepared, and raised her eyes. They say memory travels through more than blood, she said. Not a greeting. Not quite to him. I remember a man standing there before. But his face is yours. The sentence carved more than her voice. I remember wanting to love him, but not knowing what that meant. She stepped forward. Just one pace. Enough. I remember a question he never asked. And an answer I never gave. But I feel him in your skin. Words caught in his mouth, not because of awe, not fear, but the sensation of being known without history. The boy poured fine ash in a thin line between them. Not gray. Not black. A soft bronze that shimmered in waves of color when touched by breath. The pattern formed a gate. One side her. One side him. Center drawn but not crossed. He spoke again. When the shape closes, you must speak. Speak what? He didn't ask. The woman lifted her hands, palms open. I'm not her yet, she said. Not all the way. Time didn't let me age. It didn't let me forget, either. Her gaze moved toward the soil. I felt pieces of you before you arrived. In dreams I didn't own. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Not with violence. With anticipation. As though the moon itself recognized the movement. Something beneath the surface breathed differently. Heat rose from the cracks, not scorching, but scented. Like copper. Like the inside of something living. The boy whispered the word. It wasn't loud. It wasn't translated. Still, it landed in his chest like a weight. You must return it, he said. Only then will the bond seal. The line of ash shimmered. The symbol beneath his foot brightened. He didn't repeat the word. He looked at the woman. Saw the question sitting beneath her calm. I don't know what this is, he said. You do, she replied. You just don't know how you learned. He whispered the word. The moment snapped. The circle closed. Light rose from the ash, not upward, but outward, pushing into skin, into fabric, into thought. Symbols ignited across the stone, bleeding into one another, joining hands with meanings unspoken. She smiled. Not in joy. Not in triumph. In recognition. I think I loved you before you asked. The ground beneath them beat once. Something deep had heard. And it hadn't finished listening. The soil stiffened before sound reached it. No tremor. No wind. Just a sharpness in the air that hadn't been there moments before. Plants once curled gently toward the dome's broken ceiling had flattened, their stems pressed low, as if waiting for judgment. Above, black shapes carved against a dim sky. No insignia. No running lights. Just cold hulls drifting lower, pausing at intervals like they weren't scanning, but remembering. He looked up. The ships didn't hover. They loomed. Not in size. In silence. They moved with purpose not learned but inherited, gliding toward a location never broadcast. The boy ran. Small hands grabbed his wrist. Not for comfort. For urgency. They found her. The words cracked. No beacon. No signal. They still came. He tried to speak. The boy didn't wait. They know she woke up. The ships continued their slow descent. No formation. No order. Just presence folding inward. She broke something sacred. The field was meant to lock the colony, not time. The soil underfoot turned brittle. Stones that had once hummed beneath the ceremony began to dim. She promised it would work. She said the net would preserve us until help came. He looked to the woman. She stood at the center of the circle, unmoving. The boy stepped in front of her. She lied. Voice trembling. No tears. Just truth ripped too many times. She tried to save them all. But the field fractured. Time split wrong. Some slowed. Some stopped. Most. He didn't finish. His gaze turned back toward the approaching shadows. They were the ones who sent the order to contain her. Their blood sat on the thrones she defended. When they died, the caste collapsed. A sound cracked through the sky. Not a weapon. Not an engine. Just the air resisting whatever had arrived inside it. She was a scientist. Not royal. They made her something else when the old guard vanished. He didn't blink. They made her a mistake. The woman moved. One step. The earth responded, not with force but stillness, as if it agreed. The boy turned back. She knew the laws. All of them. And she knew one was older than power. He reached for the symbols drawn hours earlier. Traced a curve with his thumb. She found a way to bind herself to something beyond caste. Something they couldn't erase. He looked up. You. His voice caught. They can't kill her now. Not without breaking a right older than the war. The ships began to descend. The air tightened. She bound herself to an outsider. That invokes sanctuary. A pause. Or war. The sky opened. Not with fire. With promise. One neither side could fully control. He stepped beside her. No words. No question. Just the waiting. And whatever came through the atmosphere. The air inside the dome fractured first. Not visibly. Not with sound. A weight shifted behind the lungs, as though breath no longer belonged entirely to him. Light thinned near the circle's edge. The ash lines drawn earlier began to break apart, drifting into patterns that didn't match the ones the boy had shown. He stepped back. A shape landed outside the ruin. Not a soldier. Not a diplomat. Armor without markings. Face hidden. Weapon sealed into the forearm like bone had fused with purpose. Behind it, others waited. No words. No banners. Just stance. She didn't move. Not fear. Not defiance. Stillness that asked nothing. He turned to her. What happens if I go? No answer. Only the tilt of her eyes toward the soil. She raised her hand. Fingers brushed the edge of her own shoulder. A gesture with no meaning he understood. If you leave, she said, they'll erase me slowly. The sentence held no drama. They won't touch the boy. Another pause. But they'll unmake him. She looked away. They don't need violence. They'll do it with silence. The sound of metal boots pressing against glass came closer. He stared at the exit. The cracked arch. The path still open. His ship, wrecked but not dead, rested somewhere beyond the ridge. The emergency signal might still reach orbit. The galaxy spun on. This moon would be forgotten again. He could walk. He could forget. The boy stepped forward. Voice small. Arms shaking from something not cold. "She's all I have." The words didn't beg. They clung. Like breath held too long beneath water, offered too late to matter. The first invader stepped into the dome. Ash curled upward near its boots, recoiling without flame. The circle's light dimmed. The woman turned to him again. "If you speak the vow, they can't remove me." He waited. She lowered her head. "But you won't be what you were." He looked at the boy. Eyes too old. Face too still. A second figure entered behind the first. No urgency. Just certainty. He stepped forward. Not toward them. Toward the ring. Words waited at the base of his throat, unused but familiar. Not taught. Not learned. Planted. His heel passed the circle. The soil burned warm. The woman raised her face. A crack ran across her lower lip. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. He spoke. Not loudly. Not clearly. But true. Light surged between them. Not upward. Outward. A pulse. The invaders stopped. Not by command. By something older. The dome shook. The ash turned gold. And the moon exhaled like it had waited for this breath longer than time remembered. The circle brightened beneath his feet. Not a glow, not a flare, an ignition buried beneath language. Light moved through the soil like veins drawn by will alone, pulsing without sound. She stepped into it without pause. The space between them vanished. Not shortened, erased. Her hands rose. Not in invitation. In recognition. Ash curled around their ankles, lifting in ribbons that didn't scatter. Each strand formed letters that didn't belong to speech. He raised his palm. She placed hers against it. The dome cracked. Not from force. From memory. Above them, roots withdrew from fractured panels. Vines split open to reveal metal once hidden by overgrowth. Symbols beneath the glass reawakened, lines of gold burning into steel, shapes reassembling into codes that had been sleeping longer than the war that buried them. She spoke first. Not aloud. The vow moved between them. Not translated. Received. He returned it. The ground beneath the circle shifted. Stone panels retracted in synchronized motion, revealing a buried mechanism. A seal, ancient and untouched, rotated once, then opened. Beneath it, a light, not artificial, rose like breath from a waiting mouth. It touched their skin, passed through it, and remained. The invaders stepped forward. Weapons no longer raised. Eyes fixed on the scene with expressions unreadable. He didn't look at them. She didn't flinch. The final word left his mouth. It wasn't familiar. It wasn't human. It was his. The light surged. A pulse erupted from the circle, not upward, not outward, but inward, piercing through the crust of the moon like heat through ice. Far beneath them, machinery long silenced came alive. Not humming. Not spinning. Breathing. Above orbit, ships long buried in asteroid fragments stirred. Hulls peeled away from dust. Engines ignited without instruction. Shields activated with no pilot. An entire fleet, ancient and untouched, lit the black with authority no command chain could override. The invaders froze. Not paralyzed. Stilled. The woman turned. She had changed. Eyes clearer. Movement smoother. Every breath measured by time returned to her bones. She reached toward the ash still suspended in the air, and it obeyed, curling into her palm like it had waited to be held again. She looked at him. "I remember the first time I loved you. It wasn't this life." The boy stepped into the light of the ring. No longer afraid. The woman turned toward the broken dome. Her gaze lifted to the sky where orbit burned gold. "They buried this place to erase me. But I left myself beneath their silence." He said nothing. No need. The dome fractured higher, glass falling without sound, landing around the circle but never touching it. Light held everything in place. The moon was awake. And it remembered her. The light receded, but it did not fade. It folded inward, into stone, into roots, into the worn skin of the moon that had waited too long to speak its name aloud. The ash settled at last, no longer symbols, no longer language, but soil. The ships above held their distance. No order was issued. No retreat was called. They watched. A signal rose from beneath the surface, not in frequency, not in broadcast. A presence awakened in the core. It moved through ancient circuitry grown over with moss and quiet disuse. A protocol older than conquest was reactivated. Sovereignty did not ask permission. It announced itself. The moon spoke for the first time in generations. Not in warning. In recognition. The signal touched distant satellites left behind by forgotten expeditions. It reached listening posts still orbiting Earth, buried under bureaucracy and ice. Analysts watched their screens as the feed arrived in twin language, neither of which they understood in full. But one word translated clearly: bound. Not colonized. Not conquered. Not lost. Bound. A human had entered their lines. Not as diplomat. Not as invader. As heir. Within the circle, silence remained. She stood without armor. Without title. Without chains. He stood beside her. Not taller. Not smaller. Just present. The boy lay curled beneath the last vine that held warmth. His breaths even. Face softer. Fingers unclenched for the first time since memory had returned. She did not reach for him. She watched. Eyes no longer clouded by unfinished time. Words were unnecessary. The promise had been made. The seal had been witnessed. The bloodline had reshaped itself without blood. Above, the fleet turned slowly, their trajectories adjusting, not in formation but in deference. Ships without leaders waited for instruction from a moon no longer sleeping. Far from this orbit, terminals on Earth blinked warnings they could not classify. The name of a pilot long thought dead resurfaced in a registry flagged for diplomatic breach. Reports marked with priority codes higher than any military clearance were pulled from backup servers and fed into systems that had no human fingerprints left. The name was no longer listed alone. It appeared beside another. Both matched to a status never before activated. Join. The boy sighed once in his sleep. Not in pain. Not from fear. Just release. She lowered her gaze to the soil. No tears. No expression. Only peace earned without victory. He looked at the sky. The war still breathed out there. But the next battle would not begin the same way. It would begin with a vow. Spoken by two mouths in one voice.